Pedro from A&P-Reacts. I'm here today with my buddy Justin of Sorcerer to do a classic album review, and I don't think it gets more classic than this. Today, we're here to talk about Black Sabbath, Paranoid. You know what I was going to do? I don't have it with me right now, but I was going to bring my vinyl. I actually have an original pressing of the vinyl.
Ooh, nice.
I didn't buy it back then because I wasn't alive in 1970 when the album came out, but I bought it at a flea market, and I was really happy to realize it was an original pressing of the record. I came home, put it to play on my vinyl, and I really enjoyed the record, and then I flipped it over to side B, and you know what I realized? That the side A had a lot more spins than the side B. So there's a lot of more scratches and cracks and pops on that first side. I think whoever owned this record before me probably played side B once, but they played side A on loop. Now, let's start off with this. Are you in that camp of side A of this record being a lot stronger than side B?
Not at all. I think that side B is brilliant. So, I mean, of course, I think that I get why side A was played. I mean, if you look at the 4 songs on that side, it's War Pigs, Paranoid, Planet Caravan, and Iron Man. So, I mean, it's 3 or 4 of their
best songs,
classic songs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's what made Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath. I mean, the first record was great, but Paranoid was the one that was just kind of launched them into the heavy metal doominess that they are, and brought the legend to life, basically. So, I mean, I can understand why it was worn out, but I love side B.
I'm on the camp that if I'm going to play one side over the other, side A gets my preference. I mean, those 4 songs, it doesn't get more iconic than that.
No, it doesn't.
It's really hard to argue the point. And I think the point becomes a little bit stronger when you put side. It's not that side B is not strong. It's just that it lacks a little bit of oomph when you compare to those 4 iconic tracks on that first side. That's all. It's not like they're bad songs. It's just that first side is really stacked.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I did notice, with these records and stuff like that. Now the CD, this is from the remastered Black Box. I bought a copy of that a long time ago when it was out. But what they did was they named the songs. It's not on here, but I know. It's here. Yeah, Rat Salad. It's basically an instrumental leading into Fairies Wear Boots, and it's not really a song at all. It's just an instrumental piece that Sabbath did on so many records, and they gave them names just to fill out the track list, which is kind of weird. I was just like, but it's supposed to be after Fairies Wear Boots. I believe it's called Jack the Stripper.
Yeah,
but
it's a nice, interesting little twist. So this is, in my opinion, their best album. At least it's my favorite album. It's their second record, but like you said earlier, I feel like this is the album that really made them Black Sabbath, became Black Sabbath after Paranoid. Not to take anything away from the debut record, but this album is really the launching path, not just for them, but also for heavy metal. You feel like this is the record that gives birth to heavy metal?
I think that the first one, like Black Sabbath's self-titled debut, was initially what gave birth to black metal, to heavy metal, just because it was so frightening. Like, I'd never heard anything like that before in my life. So I was just like, whoa, this is weird. This is creepy, and I love it. It's like when you go to see a horror movie, like, you're going to get scared. That's why you want to watch it. Mm-hmm. So when I heard Ozzy singing for the first time, and just the tones, like the down-tuned guitars and just the evil trudging, I was just like, oh, I love this. Like, I'm scared, but I'm warming up to it because I was just a kid. But with Paranoid's where they kind of sort of honed in. They went from this blues-oriented band, which was Black Sabbath on Black Sabbath, and then they kind of came into their own as a band, Black Sabbath, as a heavy metal band. They weren't a blues band really anymore. There's still a few bluesy bits on there, but I think on the subsequent album that follows this, like Masters of Reality, that's where they came into their whole, like, as Black Sabbath. That's, like, for me, that's where they're like, okay, here we are, we're Sabbath, let's fucking rock. Mm-hmm. So, but Paranoid is just a pinnacle album.
So what makes it a pinnacle album? Because you're kind of making a point for everything that came before and everything that came after, but not necessarily for me. Paranoid is the birth of everything. I mean, when you look at a song like War Pigs, Paranoid, Planet Caravan, I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, this fucking track listing is immaculate. It's like immaculate conception as far as this record goes. So,
well, I think we have to look at. I think we have to look at like the time it was written. It was, you know, it was done and recorded in 1970, which was like at the tail end of the Summer of Love. And you're listening to songs like nobody was like, at least not on this scale. Like people were writing like anti-war songs and stuff. You know, Crosby, Stills and Nash had Ohio and stuff like that. Like they were all like kind of like upbeat, like friendly, like folky almost songs. But these guys, like War Pigs, just, you know, generals gather in their masses, just like witches at black masses. It's brilliant, and they're using just this satanic context that nobody else before them had done, and they're really shining some light into the darker recesses of life. And what makes this record so pinnacle today is that it could still be applied to today. So it still resonates both with the original listeners who first picked this up in 1970, with a listener like me who picked it up in the 80s. And, you know, for future generations, like kids can pick up this album and just totally click with it right away.
Yeah,
like,
both musically and lyrically. I feel like it's an album that just really didn't lose anything through time. It almost, it's a timeless classic, if you will. Because if I listen, I was actually listening to the vinyl a couple of days ago. I just pop it on because I felt like, oh, you know, I want to listen to this, like, you know, old school way, put the vinyl on and really enjoy it. And I was going through it, and musically, I was like, fuck, if this album came out today, it would still be an absolute banger. Because it has an incredible sound that didn't lose anything through time. And then I was going through the lyrics, and I'm like, wow, this also resonates with the time that we're currently in. It's incredible that as a society, we think that we've evolved and a lot has changed, but a lot of the things that were issues back then are still issues now.
Yeah, I mean, where they're writing, I think that's what Geezer Butler was kind of cool at with you know, writing the lyrics. And a bass player writing lyrics, always good.
You being a bass player, I know that gets you excited.
Yeah, we're good. You know, we're good for something. But I mean, you look at his lyrics, and he was flirting with it on the first album as well. Like he writes a lot about the occult and stuff like that, but he's very, very, very politically driven, and really takes. He puts a lot of humanity into his lyrics, like a lot of like questioning and like just. It's almost like he's going through an existential crisis while having his buddy Satan beside him. Like, don't forget my name. Put my name in there too. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Keep going. Sorry. But he's just a brilliant songwriter. And I mean, if you listen to Paranoid, would be just the epic. War Pigs is just one of those songs that's. But if you listen to like, you know, Masters of Reality, you got Children of the Grave, which is also a very politically oriented song, and just I can't even explain. Like I love this era of Sabbath so much. It's so near and dear to me. I love every record that came out between 1970 and 1980. Just hits home for me.
And we were talking about this album being the birth of heavy metal. Do you feel like this is also the birth of doom?
I think that would be the third one, to be honest with you. But yeah, this is where, like, if you listen to a song like Electric Funeral, for example, like that song is doomy as hell. It's just like, it's so evil, the way it sounds, the vibrato, you know, Ozzy's droning vocals. Like, he's not really singing. He's just, it's like robotic. And it's just so cool. So yeah, I think Paranoid would be the, you know, the starting point for doom, to be honest.
It's nice that you mentioned Planet Caravan, because I always felt that track, I love that song, but it feels really weird to be the third track on this record. Like, it just feels a little bit out of place. But at the same time, now that I've listened, like if I was listening to this album today for the first time and I was doing a review, perhaps the only criticism that I would have is that song feels so out of place. It almost like it doesn't belong in this record. And then having it as the third song, it makes that out of place feel even more noticeable. Do you know what I mean? Like if they kind of jam it in the middle of the record, like the last track of side A, or at the end of side B, something like that, you almost feel like, you know, in modern day, that's kind of where that song would have ended up, if would have even ended up on the record, because a lot of bands would probably not put the song like that on an album that just feels a lot different from everything else. But it's such an iconic track. So do you see it that way as well, that the more you listen to it, the more it fits in, but at first glance, it doesn't feel like it belongs there?
I mean, I loved that song when I first heard it as well. And you have to give it some credit because, I mean, it's sandwiched between the two biggest Black Sabbath songs ever. It's sandwiched between Paranoid and Iron Man. So, I mean, of course, it's going to seem quite out of place. But, you know, for me, it's not out of place. I loved listening to that song. I thought it was a nice kind of breath of fresh air, like when you were listening to, like, kind of digesting the lyrics from War Pigs and the you know, the insanity that is Paranoid. Just like the quick, what happened, I just got hit by a bus. Paranoid, it's so short, but it's just such a pungent song. Like, it's just like bang, and then you go into Planet Caravan. It's just like, okay, I found my moment, I can digest this is nice. And then you go right into Iron Man. So for me, it's just a really nice piece of songwriting, classy. And I wish they would have done that a little bit more, to be honest, on subsequent albums that followed. So I think it's a diamond in the rough, that one.
I feel that perhaps they realize how outside the box that song feels within the overall context of the record, and maybe that's something that in future albums, I almost, you know, I can only speak from my own perception, which is it feels that they tried to keep the albums perhaps a little bit more uniform, and not having a song that feels so out of context. I just feel like this track was so good that they couldn't really just throw it away. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, we got to find a home for it. It's just a magnificent track all around.
Yeah, I mean, they have other tracks that were like Changes, for example, is just, I've heard it a few times and I can appreciate the song that it is, but I can't stand that song. For me, it's so annoying and just so not Sabbath at all. So for me, Planet Caravan is way more Sabbath than a song like Changes, for example.
And we're talking about the music. Everybody talks about Tommy Iommi and what he's done in terms of the guitar playing and the sound that he brought into the forefront. We talked about Geezer, about the lyrics and creating these songs that have this life in them. Where do you feel like Ozzy fits into this whole thing? Because he's a great frontman. If he looks paranoid when he's singing Paranoid, he really brings to life what the song is about in terms of his facial expressions and how he moves. But musically, in terms of of what do you feel like he added to an album like Paranoid by Black Sabbath?
I think he added the charisma and the you know, the character of the album. Like, he is the madman. But I think this album just showcases everybody at their absolute best. Like, I mean, if you listen to a track like War Pigs, Bill Ward's playing the drums just phenomenally, and the guitar riffing that Tony Iommi writes is just downright brilliant. And then you have Geezer Butler as well. Like, it was very unheard of for bassists to sound like he did. Like, you can hear in the beginning of War Pigs in that intro, Under the Sirens, like he's doing like a bunch of lead stuff, just really tasteful, really cool stuff. And then Ozzy comes in with his very, very unique voice. And I think that's kind of the game changer for a lot of hard rock and heavy metal, because you had like bands like The Who, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple. They were all doing their thing, like this kind of like high pitch, like baby baby kind of stuff. And you know, Ozzy just came in. Pardon me?
Shooting from the hip almost.
Well, yeah, they were just taking a generic form of the blues. Like, I'm not going to say generic, because I mean, some of the songwriting on those albums as well, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, and The Who, are brilliant. But they were taking, you know, blues elements and just kind of rehashing vocally. Like, they're like, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And that's fine. But I think that Ozzy was kind of standing out on his own, probably because he's not a trained singer at all, or he just wasn't really used to it, not super comfortable with it. So that's where he gets his originality from, is that he just looks into himself and he is who he is, both on and off the stage. And I think that that's what he brought to the band. His insecurities actually pushed him forward as a great front figure. Because you could see in the old videos and stuff how much fun he's having as well while he's singing.
Yeah, I think it's a very organic. Specifically with this album, I always feel like he's very organic in his demeanor and how he approaches the songs. Even though he didn't write the lyrics, he approaches the lyrics almost if they were his own, and he tries to get into the mindset of what those lyrics are representing, and then that kind of comes forward. The awkwardness that I see from him, it actually, I'm with you, it kind of adds to the whole allure. It just adds to who he is as a front man, kind of defining what he's going to become down the road, and who's he going to be as a singer, which is not following necessarily the path of those that came before him, but rather create a path of his own and being his own man. And I think you start to see that a lot more on this record than in the debut album. I think this record, kind of the right pieces, the pieces were there from before, but on this album they just became a little bit more defined. Like you know, the first record perhaps had no borders, and on this one you start to feel like there is a little bit more of a redefining of who we want to be and who we actually are.
Well, yeah, it's like, on the first record, they're kind of testing their footing and stuff like that. And on this record, they're like, okay, seems pretty good. My balance is okay. It's still a little bit rocky, but we're getting there. And then on the third record, it's just like, so, I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. This is just a timeless album. And like you said, Ozzy's singing adds, like, his insecurity and stuff. It adds to the allure, and it makes it, it's not awkward. It's more charming than it is awkward, I think. And it makes kids, like teenagers and stuff like that was listening to this, like, I could be a singer. I could do that. And, these dreams of being this rock star, this heavy metal rock star, started getting into their heads, like, yeah, I could do that. Like, play it loud and just be who I am. They weren't all flashy. They weren't trying to be like super sexy on stage or anything like that, like a lot of other bands were doing, like having their shirts off and like the nice bell bottoms and playing a tambourine. Like, Ozzy was headbanging and just kicking ass. That's what he did.
This is a classic album. But having said that, there's always, or maybe not, but there's always something that we would say that, man, if this little thing here was different, or that little thing. Is there anything that you would have changed about this record?
I don't think I would have changed anything about this record. And I'm actually glad that the last minute addition to this record was Paranoid, because the song was written in 5 minutes and they needed a song to fill out the album. And that's where Paranoid came from. So Tony Iommi had the riff, and, Ozzy and Geezer were back, in the studio, and they banged it together. That's why it's so, I would say that Paranoid on this record is actually the out of place song, because it sounds so different compared to the other ones. It's more poppy, it's a bit more upbeat, but it's still a fantastic song. So I wouldn't have changed anything. Had they left it off, it would have left a little bit more to be desired, I find. So I'm really glad that they decided to put it in.
It completes the record, to be honest with you. It's hard to imagine, knowing what we know now of how the album sounds, it would be hard to imagine the record without that track.
Yeah, because originally the track, that's why there's a guy on the front cover with a sword. It was going to be called War Pigs. But Paranoid was a hit. So, of course he called it Paranoid.
But I think that I saw a documentary about this, and I can't remember right now. I think the change in the title had, because War Pigs was also not the original name of the song, if I remember correctly.
It was something satanic, I think.
Yeah, there was a different name to it, and then they had to change it because I think the record label wasn't okay with it. The thing was going to be a little bit too much. Blah, blah, blah. That was so.
The lyrics were different.
There was some differences there as well. So this is a record that it wasn't necessary. It's not necessarily today the way it was originally designed, if you will. There was some reconstruction and some remodeling as they went through it. So from that perspective, it turns out so organic and so complete, even though it was kind of a work in progress, if you will.
Yeah, you can listen to the original recording of War Pigs on Ozzy's Ozman Cometh. It's on it's one of the bonus songs. It's just different lyrics. It's still the same. I think a little bit maybe slower, a little bit doomier, but it's still a great song. But yeah, the added help from executives and stuff like that, like the free hands, I guess you could say. I think that in this instance, like for a lot of records, it doesn't work. Like when some suit gets their hands on it and just ruins the whole bloody thing. But in this case, it actually helped the band make a stellar album. So
one last thing to throw at you, and that is with Tony Iommi, has he created all the riffs, all the sounds, and now everybody else is just kind of like remixing it?
I think that he's written every riff, forwards, backwards, upside down, inside out, like anything and everything has been written by Tony Iommi. You just don't know it yet. He's just like, I've only heard stories because I've never had the the honor of meeting the guy and being able to ask him myself. But I've heard stories from people that he's got like tapes everywhere. Just like he's always thinking of a riff. Like he's always got a riff, just always, constantly, nonstop. Tony's just, oh, that's an idea, record it. He's got so many riffs. And if you listen to Black Sabbath as a whole, even when they were changing singers with Dio and they went over to, they systematically evolved and changed heavy metal with every lineup change. That's how good they are. So, I mean, you can't really argue that. It's like some people are going to say, well, I hate the Tony Martin era. It's like, yeah, but, he kind of created epic doom metal there on those records. Or you listen to the Dio stuff, like, oh, I don't really like the Dio stuff, which I don't know how anybody can't. But they were pretty much, when the new wave of British heavy metal was coming out, and you had bands like Maiden and Saxon and stuff like that. Like, here comes this little Dio, this little short little troll, fronting Black Sabbath with his bombastic voice and just knocking everybody, absolutely everybody, on their ass. So there was like 2 records in 1980, Heaven and Hell and British Steel. So Black Sabbath beat the crap out of these new wave of British heavy metal bands and still go on to make, they made a few records as of late, like 13, I think is the last one. But still, such a great album. Like they still got it. And I'm sure if they were to get together again and record something, it'd be great. I'd listen to it.
Do you think that will ever happen, though?
I don't think it'll ever happen with the original lineup. One thing I have to say is that I loved Heaven and Hell, the Dio album that came out. That album is just, it pretty much blows anything that they put out in the 90s, late 80s out of the water. It's just such a fantastic album. So I hope that Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler meet up again, maybe bring Bill Ward back into the mix and maybe do a track. But, you never know. Time will tell. We'll see. Ozzy's getting old as well himself. So
I know that's the problem. We don't have much time left with these iconic legends around. So it feels like that the scent of that hourglass is kind of like dissipating. There's barely any scent grains left.
Yeah, the ones that will be left, I'm sure Ozzy will throw up his nose or something like that. But just to keep them a little longer. But I think that if they were to get together again, I wouldn't want them to do an album, just because I wouldn't want them to like do something half-hearted.
Yeah, you almost like it's one of those things that sometimes it's better to just be left alone, because the memory and the legacy is as strong as it is now, and it doesn't need any additions to it. Because
yeah,
I'm almost afraid that an addition will not destroy, but it will tarnish somewhat the legacy.
Yeah, and I think that's why when you go back and listen to an album like this, for me, I don't know about you, but when I put Paranoid on, if I've got it in my headphones and I'm on the bus or the train or in the car or whatever, I just get a smile on my face. It takes me back to when I was like this angry teenager, skipping out of school and maybe going downstairs to smoke a joint, sit on the couch, have the windows open, just listen to Sabbath and be like, yes, like there was nothing better. It was just the ultimate, I feel good music. Like, even though it was heavy and stuff, you just felt great listening to it. And I still, even though I'm not, into drugs or anything like that, but I still get as euphoric as I did back then. Listening to it, it just brings up this jubilant, like, oh, I love this band.
Yeah, I think it also brings back the memories of when you listen to the album for the first time, where you were, your perhaps your own path into this specific music was a little bit trailblazed by a band like them, and how they influenced your taste and everything that you did beyond that. For me, I see it from that perspective. When I listen to an album like this, it takes me back to my youth when I was discovering. I got into metal with heavier bands, but then I kind of wanted to know who the godfathers, who the grandfathers of everything was, and I went back to older bands, and I went even beyond metal into older bands, and they were a band that really stood out to me because I was not really into the. There's maybe a band or two that I was into in terms of the flower power and all of that movement that was happening in the in the 60s to the late 60s before they showed up, but they kind of cemented what I would like to hear if I was around that time, because that I didn't really connect with the music that was being played there. I needed something a little bit darker, a little bit more ominous, a little bit more representative of the world around me, because it doesn't matter how much I think the world is a wonderful place. It's not. It's a really scary place, and I needed music that really described that, and that impacted me in my youth all the way to today. So when I listen to this album, I still get those vibes.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it, and that's probably why this album's so timeless, because you got a band, Black Sabbath, all the guys coming from Birmingham, working class England, like not a good place to be in those days, you know, establishing themselves on the world stage as a gigantic rock band. But it wasn't for, like, you know, tedious, like over the top, you know, guitar virtuosity or anything like that. It wasn't the showmanship. It was the honesty in the music that really hit home. And that's why I think that it could still deliver today. If I was to show some teenager, you know, hey, listen to this, you know, who's this? Black Sabbath. And they put it on, they would click, you know, it would just hit home, because the words, the lyrics, the feeling, the vibe, everything is there. It's just so brutally honest that you can't not click to it. So
it's timeless.
I don't know. Yeah. Effortless, timeless, just brilliant.
Well, Justin, thank you very much for your time today to chat about Black Sabbath Paranoid. It came out September 18th of 1970, a date that will stay in infamy.
A date that will forever live in infamy.
In infamy. So thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate these chats, and we'll do this again next month with a different record.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
See you, man.
Take care.